Hello, I'm Frank Hutchison.
I'm Meredith Hutchison Hartley.
And I'm Emily Geddes.
And welcome back to the Hidden History of Business podcast.
Today we want to talk about disruption again, and this time we're going to talk about some examples of why modern examples of disruption really aren't disruption.
So I was looking at CNBC's list for 2015 of the 50 most disruptive companies in the world, and I was really kind of disappointed. We've discussed in other episodes how we feel about disruption as a modern buzzword, but some of the companies they picked, like Birchbox or Warby Parker, we really struggled to see why they would be considered disruptive in a larger context.
Can you give us a brief description of what Birchbox and Warby Parker are? Because I wasn't aware.
Right. So Birchbox is a subscription service. It started a few years ago. It was the first really successful online subscription product. Basically, you pay a fee, and every month they send you a box full of large deluxe samples, sometimes full-size products. They're cosmetics, skincare, things that you might not be able to afford to just go and buy the full product. Instead, you get these samples all for a very low fee. You're guaranteed a certain number every month, and it was wildly successful.
Well, and we've seen that in a whole bunch of other boxes. Try the World sends you food from a different area.
And they're for clothing as well.
Stitch
Fix is another one. It definitely was, it made a big splash in that industry. But is it disruptive? We'll talk about that in a few minutes. Warby Parker is a glasses company. And what they do is they allow people to go online. They have a system for taking a picture, measuring your face. You can actually upload a picture, try on glasses, and then they will send you different pairs of glasses to try on, pick which one you want, and then you can send them back. And they're much cheaper than what you're going to get going into your local eyeglass place. They're cheaper than even the supposed discount retailers like Costco and Sam's Club and other large optometry businesses, because everything is done remotely and online, so they don't have the same overhead. But really what we're dealing with here are the old historical model of mail order, catalogs, and remote purchasing, which has been going on really for centuries and millennia in some industries.
So we got looking at the history of catalogs, and the first, what we would recognize as a catalog, similar to what we see nowadays, was back in 1498. Aldus Manutius of Venice was a bookseller. He decided that he could better get the word out about his products if he made a list of what he had available that people could peruse rather than having to come into the shop to see what was actually on the shelves. So he made this list. It's the first catalog that we have record of, and that was in 1498. That was more than 500 years ago.
And then in 1667, William Lucas, who was a gardener in what's now England, he printed a seed catalog. This is different from what Aldus Manutius did, because William Lucas actually printed the prices in his catalog. And not only that, he mailed them to his customers through this developing British mail system. And that was significant because usually you had to go into a store, you had to negotiate a price. He recognized that people had a lot of options for where they could go to get seeds. By telling people in advance what his prices were, he was giving himself a better chance that they would automatically come to him than go somewhere else and try to negotiate a price. It was really a kind of marketing. But even though this catalog went out, it was mailed, people couldn't order remotely from him. They still had to come into his store. So this was the equivalent of publishing an ad in the newspaper saying, low prices, here's what our deal is, come on in.
In the next century, in the 1700s, the ubiquitous Benjamin Franklin founded the Library Company of Philadelphia in 1731. It was America's first successful lending library. It's still in existence today, which I think is fabulous, but it was a subscription library that was supported by its shareholders. It still is today. So he developed this catalog of the 600 or so volumes that they had, mostly in scientific or academic fields, to send out to the subscribers so that they knew what was available at this library. And it was also interesting because this catalog was the first to use the concept of satisfaction guaranteed.
Now, also, Franklin was selling scientific and academic books, which were not necessarily the largest market.
No, this is a pretty niche.
So It would have been very cost prohibitive to try to open a shop in every single city that had a university. There weren't that many in early America, but you had the big ones. You had Harvard, you had William and Mary, which were really the big competitors. And this allowed him to reach people not only there, but everywhere else in the colonies as well. So not only did he find a way to take this small little niche market, he found a way to market it to a broader audience using catalogs. He used satisfaction guaranteed to get people to trust that distance ordering, but he also used a subscription service to stabilize his income, which all in all is a pretty sophisticated business strategy.
Well, this is Benjamin Franklin we're talking about.
This is Benjamin Franklin. At the same time, it wasn't necessarily a catalog, but moving out of the Renaissance and into the industrial age, people were using fashion magazines. Dressmakers or tastemakers would print pictures of what the current fashions were in the big cities. And then women would receive these pictures and take them to their local dressmakers, their dress shops, and say, "Ooh, I would like you to make this for me." And that's significant on two fronts. One, this was a way of, it wasn't necessarily a commercial mechanism, but people wanted that. It was filling a need for people. But on top of that, the style of fabric people wanted frequently changed. And the local dressmaker might not have that on hand. So you would go in with this picture, say, "I'd like this in a specific color of fabric." And then you could say, "Well, I don't have that, but I'll order that in for you." Because even though the local shops didn't necessarily carry everything, they all got their product from somewhere. And they may not have had a catalog, but they may have had simply a list, and they knew what their suppliers could get for them. So that's another component to what's going on here. And that culminates in about 1861. A man named Price Jones was a Welsh flannel maker. And he really created the modern mail order system. The railroad system had been built in the UK and really standardized in the 1840s, and he took advantage of that. He printed catalogs that he then used the railroad mail system to send to his rural customers, people who were not going to come see him very frequently, because he wanted a way to get orders outside of the normal travel times. Usually these farmers would be on the farm all year, and they would come into town maybe once or twice a year. This gave him a way to reach them when they weren't coming into town. On top of that, he then promised them that he would ship to them very, very quickly using those reliable railway systems. So if they sent him an order, he could predict and tell them when their order would come in. And it was much faster than their local general store or supplier could guarantee it. But his catalog didn't just go to those rural customers. People started passing them around. He started getting more requests for them until eventually he counted Florence Nightingale, Queen Victoria, and royals across Europe as his customers, who all wanted this very high-quality, warm Welsh flannel. Eventually, he developed new products because he could predict what his revenue was going to be, and he wanted to keep these people. He wanted to let them know that there was going to be a new catalog every year with new products. He developed something called the Euclisia rug, which was a prototype for the modern sleeping bag made out of this warm flannel. It became so popular, gained as a customer the Russian army that ordered 60,000 units from him. Eventually, his business grew to have over 100,000 customers, and he received a knighthood from Queen Victoria for his contributions to the British economy. Now, this wasn't just happening in the UK. At the same time in the United States, companies like the Tiffany Blue Book, we all know Tiffany as the silver and jewelry company, they were using a catalog in the 1840s to spread the word about their products. Montgomery Ward became iconic in the 1870s when they released really the first extremely diverse mail order catalog. You could order toys, games, clothing, products. They got topped very quickly by a competitor.
Sears and Roebuck.
Yes, in the 1880s, in fact 1888 was when Sears released its first catalog.
I've got to tell a story, just a little snippet here that I just love. One of the reasons that Sears started taking off and Montgomery Ward was not able to keep up was very, very simple, but very, very clever. Sears realized that as the newcomer in the industry, it would be difficult to unseat the behemoth Montgomery Ward that was getting very entrenched. So they started making their catalogs a slightly smaller size, dimension-wise, so that when customers got both a Montgomery Ward and a Sears catalog, well, when you're stacking books, you naturally put the smallest one on top. So the Sears catalog would end up at the top of the pile, and then when you go to look for a particular thing, you grab the book that's on top of the pile first. And so their sales started taking off while Montgomery Ward's started decreasing, simply because Sears changed the size of the catalog.
It also made their catalog look thicker. They were a full 322 pages because their pages were smaller. There were fewer products on each page, but it certainly looked like Sears had more to offer customers.
Such a small change that was just
and it was really
brilliant.
Successful. Sears, within just 5 years, they were making $400,000 a year in late 1800s money. And just 2 years later, in 1895, they were making $750,000 a year. But the question is why? Why was mail order so appealing to rural America?
What you have is rural America. First of all, they're living on farms. in the rural communities, and they don't have access to a lot of goods. If you go to your local store, it is basically one stop for everything. That means you have flour, you have your commodities, you may have some specialty goods, you have what's needed for the farm, the basics, but you don't have anything else. And they really can't order those things unless they do so at a high cost.
And in many cases, these farmers were coming in. They were only paid a couple of times a year when they were able to harvest or butcher their animals. So they were buying a lot of things on credit. So purchasing in rural America was a very subjective experience where your price was based on the perception of the general store owner. If you came in, you had to negotiate a price, and you had to buy it on credit usually. And the shop owner's feeling about your credit worthiness determined what price you got, what conditions you got, and how much you were able to purchase. And that got really old because you never knew walking into a store how much you were going to pay. But the Sears and Montgomery Ward catalogs changed that, because you had a huge selection of goods at fixed prices.
And they also had such a wide variety that people can now see what was available, whereas before, you may not even know that something existed. But now you knew everything that was available because it was there in the catalog.
And they moved beyond just regular goods. By 1908, they were actually selling home kits. You could purchase a kit to build your entire house from Sears. And this continued until the 1940s. A lot of houses, we still see them around America. You can Google Sears houses, and if you look at those pictures, you're going to recognize some of that architecture. In fact, Sears even issued the first Christmas catalog, where they had goods specifically for Christmas, and they were smart. They released it several months in advance to allow people to plan for Christmas every year.
Where are we today, though, with this?
Just talking about the mail order industry in and of itself, not dealing with internet sales even. Mail order industry is currently a $100 billion industry. And that doesn't include an additional $2 trillion a year in incremental sales, meaning things that are added on or sold in addition, or when you transfer customers to be online or through subscription. That's a massive industry, just when you deal with mail order. But what we have to recognize with companies like Warby Parker or Birchbox is they're doing that exact same thing. The difference is that, for instance, in the optometry industry, the standard is that you go into a store, you pick out your glasses, you buy them, you wait for them to be made, and then you go home with them. The only difference with Warby Parker is that they are doing it online and remotely. It's been happening for centuries. Same thing with Birchbox. It is a subscription sample service.
What is the difference between Birchbox and the library company in Philadelphia?
Well, just from a subscription standpoint, not much. The difference for Birchbox is that they've managed to combine products from a lot of other companies and get those directly in the hands of customers. But that was happening in general stores and in department stores, and even through, you go back to the concept of the local co-op, where community farms, you all participate in growing the food, and then every week or every month you get a basket of whatever food was available, or whatever partnerships existed with local dairies or meat producers. So this, again, isn't a new concept. We've just applied it to an industry that hadn't traditionally been using the model.
And we're using new technologies to make things more efficient.
That's it. You're dealing with technology and scope. Those are really the only differences between what Warby Parker's doing and what Benjamin Franklin or William Lucas or Price Jones was doing.
So when you hear the words disruptive innovations used today, be a little skeptical about just how disruptive they really are.
If you'd like to learn more about the subject we discussed today, head on over to our website at www.hiddenhistoryofbusiness.com. You can also find us on Facebook as The Hidden History of Business, and find us on Twitter. Our handle is @HiddenBiz. That's @HiddenBiz. And if you enjoyed this podcast or would like to give us some more feedback, head on over to iTunes or to our Facebook page. We love hearing from our listeners. And thank you so much for listening.